A man accidentally discovered a hidden compartment inside the antique desk he had just purchased, and driven by curiosity, he opened it, only to find a thick stack of letters tucked inside. Scott casually opened one and realized it was a love letter from 100 years ago. At the same time, a girl named Elizabeth had just returned home. As usual, she sat at her desk and opened the secret compartment. But to her horror, her private letters had vanished. What Elizabeth could never have imagined was that, at that very moment, Scott, living 100 years in the future, was reading those deeply personal letters with great interest. Through the letters, Scott learned that Elizabeth was the eldest daughter of a noble family. Though she had lived in wealth since childhood, her father still insisted she marry a man she did not love. Even though Elizabeth longed for true love and tried to resist, women of that era had no say in their own marriages. Elizabeth loved poetry and held on to a deeply romantic spirit. She often poured her soul into writing love letters, even if the man she wrote to might not truly exist. Scott was moved by her letters, so he opened his laptop and began drafting a reply, urging Elizabeth to stay true to her heart. He told her she shouldn't marry someone she didn't love, and perhaps the man of her dreams would appear one day. Or maybe, just maybe, that person was him. As he wrote, Scott laughed at himself. He couldn't believe how childish he was, pretending to be someone else's fairy tale prince and writing a reply to a woman from 100 years ago. This gap in time seemed like the most impossible fantasy. But the next day, Scott still told his mother about the desk. He thought she wouldn't believe him, but to his surprise, she did.
H.G. Wells believed in time travel, and Einstein thought that time was just another dimension. You know, some people believe that souls can travel through time.
His mother said that if he wanted to connect with someone from the past, he had to prepare properly. Then she handed him a stamp she had been saving for years. Scott took the stamp. Next, his mother handed him a bottle of ink. Luckily, there was an old post office in the north of town, built in the early 1900s, that was still open 24 hours a day. But Scott hesitated.
Do you think this is going to work?
Wouldn't it be awesome if it did?
As night fell, lines from Elizabeth's letters kept replaying in his mind, leaving him restless and unable to sleep. Perhaps guided by fate, he left his room and actually began writing a reply to Elizabeth. Then, he drove to the old post office his mother had told him about. The building was worn and filled with the scent of time, and the so-called 24-hour service turned out to be nothing more than a dim oil lamp left behind by the postmaster. Scott looked around and soon found the mailbox. He slipped the letter inside, hoping for the best, but feeling far from certain. What he didn't know was that the wheels of fate had already begun to turn. By the next morning, a maid from 100 years ago really did receive a letter addressed to Elizabeth. At the time, Elizabeth was on a date with Count Everett, who ran a newspaper company. Her father had arranged for them to be together, hoping it would benefit the family's future. Elizabeth had no way to refuse, so she tried her best to delay things. But her father wasn't giving her much time. When she went upstairs to rest, he followed her and told her she had to continue seeing Everett and eventually marry him. While her father spoke, Elizabeth glanced at the letter she had received that morning. As she read the strange and scattered words, her heart skipped a beat. A sharp headache struck her, and her breathing grew labored. This had always been one of Elizabeth's old ailments, but rest usually helped. Her father saw her condition and reluctantly left the room. Elizabeth quickly went to her desk and opened the secret compartment, only to find that all her treasured letters were gone. Meanwhile, Scott was at home leisurely watching a basketball game on TV, having completely forgotten about the letter he had sent. Then the desk made a strange sound. Out of curiosity, he opened the hidden compartment again, and to his astonishment, there was actually a reply inside. Scott was stunned. He immediately opened the envelope and found Elizabeth's words full of confusion.
Who are you? And how could you know there was something in my secret place to be stolen? I wonder as I place this second letter in the same place as the first. Am I in the toils of some feverish dream? Or will you violate my privacy again? In mystification, Elizabeth Whitcomb.
Without hesitation, Scott wrote her back, explaining everything that had happened in the past few days. From buying the desk to sending the first letter, Elizabeth was equally shocked. She never expected to be communicating with someone from a century in the future, and it was clear the desk was the key. From that moment on, they began writing to each other almost every day. Elizabeth asked Scott many questions, especially whether he had ever experienced a passionate and profound love. Scott didn't know how to answer. Even though he was engaged to someone through an arranged match, it had only been to meet his family's expectations at the right time in his life. People often say that when you're in love, the joy of seeing your partner is like a Christmas tree glowing with lights. But Scott had never felt that kind of happiness. Not until he received Elizabeth's second letter the night before. Only then did something stir in his heart. At the same time, Scott showed the letter to his mother, but she didn't say much. She simply advised him to face reality.
My son, who is engaged to be married, is having an affair with a woman who's been dead for over 100 years. This woman doesn't exist.
Her words reminded Scott that he was already engaged, even if the woman wasn't truly the one he loved. So he deleted the draft he had written to Elizabeth. That week, Elizabeth received no letter from Scott, and her heart sank, as if she had just lost a rare kindred spirit. Yet she also understood what Scott was struggling with.
I'm worried about those tender feelings in the first place.
I'm not so innocent as you might think, Mr. Corrigan. I have danced the waltz with many men, and am an avid reader of the modern novel. So I am au courant on the subject of forbidden passion. The hard truth is, we are doomed to be chaste, to never touch each other, hear each other, see each other. So what harm can there be to write to each other? If you are still there, write to me quickly and tell me what it means to light up like a Christmas tree.
And that day, Scott couldn't help himself. He showed up at Elizabeth's place, wanting to see with his own eyes the world she lived in. But the once glorious estate was now faded and dull. He stepped forward and knocked, and an elderly maid opened the door. Perhaps because guests were rare, she cheerfully allowed Scott to enter and take a look around. Scott stepped into this haven preserved within the river of time, and in his mind echoed the soft whisper of Elizabeth's voice. The maid, May, now served the granddaughter of Elizabeth's sister. Her name was Clarice. Scott was thrilled. He approached her eagerly, hoping to learn more about Elizabeth, but Clarice, now very old, could no longer recall the past. Scott had no choice but to leave. And just as he was about to head downstairs, a sudden warmth flowed into his heart. At the same moment, Elizabeth also stopped in her tracks, feeling the very same sensation. In that instant, across time and space, fate seemed to entwine their paths. But as Scott lingered in that fleeting moment of tenderness, May interrupted and brought him back to the present. Even as he left, Scott remained lost in that emotion, unable to calm himself for a long time. Back home, he quickly poured everything he had felt into a new letter. Meanwhile, Elizabeth snatched the letter eagerly from the postman's hand. She had been waiting impatiently. Inside, she found a photo of a glowing Christmas tree. By the time she finished reading, her eyes were already brimming with tears. They decided to exchange photos. On a sunny afternoon, Elizabeth placed fresh flowers in her golden curls and asked the best photographer to take her portrait. Scott also took a photo of himself and placed it in his next letter. But this time, the maid who received the letter accidentally dropped it, and Elizabeth never saw Scott's photo. Moreover, she still had to continue going on dates with Everett. Elizabeth had submitted her poetry to Everett's newspaper several times, so this day she eagerly asked what he thought of her writing. But Everett brushed off her hopes with a few perfunctory compliments. It was clear Everett cared only about marrying her. He had no interest in understanding her soul. Elizabeth was heartbroken and decided to stop writing poetry altogether. After learning about it, Scott quickly wrote her a letter, urging her not to give up on writing poetry, even if there was no kindred spirit now. Someday in the future, her work would surely be appreciated by others. Even though they couldn't touch, Elizabeth's poetry had already crossed time and space and touched Scott's heart in the most real way. As her headaches grew increasingly severe, Elizabeth decided to travel to the city where her cousin lived to seek medical treatment. But her younger sister Flossie was worried and insisted on going with her. Seeing this, Elizabeth told her the truth about corresponding with Scott and asked her sister to write back to him in her place. Once everything was arranged, Elizabeth set out on her journey. But unfortunately, Scott got into an accident during a bicycle race. At the same time, Elizabeth's carriage was jolted violently on the road. Though Scott's injuries were minor, a simple arrhythmia, he remained unconscious for reasons no one could explain. Meanwhile, Elizabeth arrived at the clinic. While waiting for her appointment, she happened to meet a colonel. It was their first encounter, but both of them felt an unexplainable sense of familiarity. What should have been just a fleeting encounter, Colonel Denby was unwilling to let slip, so he deliberately arranged another meeting and invited Elizabeth to join him for afternoon tea. Although she didn't give a direct answer when Denby raised his arm, she naturally slipped hers through it. They arrived at a quaint cafe filled with romance in the air. Perhaps fate had finally paused its cold march.
How is it that I have the total conviction I know you?
I don't know. I feel the same.
Elizabeth mentioned her encounter with Denby in her letter to Scott. They admired each other. Denby was witty, charming, and deeply passionate about poetry. He always stayed close, patiently listening to her recite her verses. And most surprisingly, Elizabeth could feel traces of Scott in Denby. On the breeze-kissed lake, the whirlpool of love began to stir gently in both their hearts. But the happiness didn't last long. Denby soon received orders to relocate his unit. In that era of war and chaos, countless lovers were torn apart by distance. At the same time, as if sensing something, Scott suddenly awoke in the middle of the night. The first thing he did was open the secret compartment in the desk, which was now overflowing with letters. Scott carefully read Elizabeth's recent letters. Although he was glad she had met Denby, his heart sank when he learned that Denby had been sent to the front lines. Panicked, Scott searched historical battle records and saw it clearly. Denby was listed as killed in action on July 3rd. Looking again at Elizabeth's letter, he calculated that, in her time, the 3rd of July was just 2 days away. Scott jumped into action. He had to warn Elizabeth before it was too late, but when he arrived at the post office, it was already engulfed in flames. If he couldn't send the letter, Elizabeth would receive only heartbreak. Scott couldn't accept that. Without hesitation, he ran around the building and burst in through the back, braving the inferno. Just seconds before the flames reached the fuel tanks, he managed to drop the letter into the box. After that, Elizabeth could only rely on herself. But at that moment, Elizabeth had no idea what was coming. At the station, she kissed Denby goodbye. Just as Denby was about to board the train, he suddenly turned back. The train slowly pulled away, but Denby had to leave. He stepped into the golden light of dawn, leaving Elizabeth standing alone, accompanied only by tears. Back home, Elizabeth had no time to rest. Everett paid another visit, and she had to keep pretending to follow her father's plan. Just then, Scott's letter arrived. Reading it, Elizabeth could not hide her panic. She asked the servants to prepare her bags and begged Everett to take her with him.
Dear lady, I would do anything to please you, but against the wishes of your father.
His cold reply left Elizabeth deeply disappointed. They didn't understand why she had just returned only to leave again in such a hurry. But no one could stop her now. She drove her carriage to the station, only to find that the trains to the front lines had been locked down. With no other choice, she pleaded with the coachman to take her there. But no one wanted to go near the battlefield during such dangerous times. Seeing Elizabeth's desperation, one coachman finally softened. He understood that if he didn't help her tonight, no one else would. Through the night, the carriage raced under the stars, and as they neared the front, dawn was already creeping across the sky. When Elizabeth asked for Denby, her heart sank at the response. But she didn't give up. She searched frantically for any trace of him. And when they finally met again, Denby was covered in blood. In his final moments, he wanted to hear Elizabeth read him her poetry one last time. He wiped away her tears and then closed his eyes forever. Elizabeth's love had only just begun, yet it had already ended in death. She had lost Denby forever, as if she had lost another version of Scott. Scott wanted desperately to write back and comfort her, but he was powerless to do so. After receiving no letters from Scott for a long time, Elizabeth decided to burn all her poems and correspondence. But just then, the maid brought in a letter that had fallen beneath the desk. Inside was a photo, and the moment she saw it, Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. The man in the picture was unmistakably the face she had tried so hard to forget, but could never erase. At the same time, Scott finally realized he was in love with Elizabeth, and he decided to confess everything to his fiancée, Deborah. Deborah looked at the letters they had exchanged, feeling like the entire situation was absurd. Just then, the desk's secret compartment echoed again, another letter from Elizabeth, and this one included a photo of her and Denby. The face in the photo stunned both Scott and Deborah. Denby looked exactly like Scott. Deborah couldn't accept it. She didn't know what to feel or what to do, but Scott no longer wanted to hide the truth. Without love, their life together would only bring pain and resentment.
To be loved completely.
Am I gonna try to understand what's happening here? But I know this. If you don't feel that way about me, we shouldn't be together.
Though Deborah cried bitterly, in the end, she chose to let him go. Later, when Scott returned to the old house once more, he discovered that Clarice had passed away. As he stepped into Elizabeth's room, he felt a strange presence, as if she were right beside him. When he approached the vanity, the sensation grew stronger. It was as if Elizabeth was standing right there in front of him. On the other side of time, Elizabeth too felt Scott's touch. She closed her eyes and let herself be completely immersed in the moment. But once again, May arrived and interrupted the silence. In her hands was an old wooden box, Elizabeth's belongings. Inside were the letters and poems Elizabeth had written long ago. Through them, Scott learned that she had never given up on writing and had later become a teacher. Most importantly, she didn't marry Everett. She remained single for the rest of her life. Tucked among the letters was a faded, color-tinted photograph. Just moments ago, it felt as if they could still feel each other's warmth. But now, they were forever separated by life and death. Scott arrived at Elizabeth's grave and laid down the flowers in his hand. As he brushed aside the overgrown weeds, it was one final love letter from Elizabeth. "I never forgot." Scott's eyes welled with tears. In that moment, he made a decision. He would never marry, and he would spend the rest of his life cherishing this love. And just then, a golden retriever ran up to Scott's feet, as if it had chosen him as its owner. But when its true owner called again and again, it finally turned back. And when Scott looked up, he saw a young woman who looked exactly like Elizabeth in her youth. He walked over and invited her for afternoon tea. This moment was so strikingly similar to the scene from 100 years ago. In this whirlwind called love, perhaps Deborah was the one who paid the highest price. When we cannot give someone our whole heart, the kindest choice is to let go. After the brief pain of goodbye comes the chance for everlasting happiness. The film reminds us that love doesn't have to be grand or dramatic, nor does it require dazzling vows. Sometimes it's just a quiet encounter, a letter never sent, or a lingering regret carried by time. True love often grows in the most ordinary moments, healing the deepest wounds in places we never even noticed. And this unfinished story continues to flow quietly through the river of time, warming the hearts of all those who still believe in love.